I'm Shalisha Kerr. I'm the music director at Lifehouse Church, and I'm going to be talking today about music theory. Basically, my hope is for worship team members, vocalists, instrumentalists, anyone who is serving on a worship team to be able to have a basic knowledge of music theory to help them be able to be as excellent as possible in their role. So you may be asking, what is music theory? If you're unfamiliar with it, basically this is the study of the possibilities and the practices of music. Music is math, music is language, music is art, music is science. Music has a lot of different aspects to it, but the music theory is sort of getting into a little bit more of that technical side, some of that math, some of that language, so that we can all be speaking in a way that we can understand each other as we make music, as we practice, as we prepare for the weekend services. So I wanted to just kind of give you a basic overview of the theory of music. So as we start, I have a keyboard here. If you're not a piano player and you're maybe a guitar player or a vocalist or a drummer, you may not be as familiar with the keyboard. The reason that I'm using this is because it's the best visual representation of the musical scale. It's literally in black and white, it's left to right. It's a really easy way to see each pitch and each tone as you study them. So basically, as you look at the keys, you'll see a series of black keys, and they're in a pattern, 2s and 3s, and you'll see a series of white keys that surround them. So in music, we only have 12 notes total. You have a series of black and white keys left to right, and you'll see that as you go chronologically, or as we call it in music, chromatically, you'll be able to see the series of where there's a black key, where there's a white key, and you'll see that the pattern repeats itself. Once you get to this point, you'll reach it again when you come to the next group of 2 black keys. So they just continue on and on, up and down the keyboard. But there's only 12 total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then we're back to that one. Now, you may have heard the song Do, Re, Mi from The Sound of Music.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Oh, let's see if I can make it easier.
That's scale degrees that make up a major scale, and all that is a series of what we call half steps and whole steps. So what I did earlier, which is called chromatic ascension or descension of the keys, is where you count both black and white keys left to right, or if you're going backwards, right to left, and that is going to be what we would call half steps. A whole step is just what it sounds like, 2 half steps together. So if I were to move from this key to this key, a white key to a black key, that's only a half a step. But if I were to go from a white key to the next white key, I'm skipping a black key in between, so that's a whole step. So whenever we look at a scale, it's always going to have the same pattern of half steps and whole steps. I hope that makes sense so far. So what I always usually do is start with C, because the key of C is the most basic major scale that we have. It doesn't have any black keys in the major scale. It'll be all the white keys in a row. And you'll see that that follows a certain step of half steps and whole steps. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then this would be counted as 8, which would complete the scale, or you can count it as 1 again because it's starting that repeated pattern. So every major scale has 7 notes in it. Or as you may have heard before, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, and then you go back to Do.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, so do.
So whenever you're looking at the keys in that way, we can see that they follow a pattern. From 1 to 2 is a whole step because we skip that black key in between. From 2 to 3 is also a whole step because there's a black key in between, but we see from 3 to 4, there is no black key in between, so this is only a half step apart. And you see that pattern continue, whole step, whole step, whole step, and then the half step to bring us back to 1. So that pattern will always be the same no matter what key you're in, if you're in a major key, which is what the majority of our songs are in. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's our pattern for half steps and whole steps that make up the major scale. The reason that this is important is because if you need to transpose or if you need to find your chords for whatever key you're in, that pattern is going to help you to know which pitches or which tones you're looking for. And that'll also help you as a vocalist if you're looking at harmonies or if you're looking to transpose. Let's say there's a song that the original chording is in a male vocal led key and you need to find one in a female key that would be compatible for your range. Knowing these, what we call scale degrees, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the key is going to be really valuable for that. And just so you know, these black keys and half steps and whole steps also serve another purpose, because each key with that pattern will include some black keys. C is the one that doesn't. It's the only one that is all white keys. Every other key is going to have at least one black key. So anytime that we raise a pitch by a half step, that could be a black key or a white key. Anytime we raise it, it's called a sharp. And anytime we lower a tone, it's called a flat. So you may have seen sharps and flats before. The sharp symbol kind of looks like a hashtag, and the flat symbol sort of looks like a lowercase b. So anytime that you're looking at a lead sheet, a chord chart, or a piece of sheet music, if you see those symbols, that indicates that you're supposed to take that specific note up or down by a half step. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and teach you just the basics about how to build chords. Now that you know the theory behind the scale degrees for any key, that can also be used in just a simple math equation sort of to help you to find out how to build chords. There's a lot more details. If you wanted to memorize every single scale, you could do that, but really it comes down to the same math every time. So a major scale is made up of 3 notes. It's usually the 1, 3, and the 5 of that key. So as we talked about the pattern of half steps and whole steps, you would be looking at 1, 3, and 5 for your major chord. So to do that, all you have to do is find your root, which is the 1. So if you're looking for a C chord, you would start with C. And then you go up the correct amount of half steps to find the 3rd scale degree and the 5th scale degree. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that trick right now. So just to make it really simple, what that will be is from the root, you go up 4 half steps to find the 3rd. And then you go up 3 more half steps to find the 5th. So from the root, you move up 4, and then you move up 3. And then you play all 3 of those notes simultaneously to create that root position chord. And that's really valuable if you are interested in learning an instrument. If you're a vocalist who's never played an instrument, knowing how to play those chords is a great first step. But you don't have to know every single key, every single scale. If you want to use this little, I guess you can call it a trick, a little tip, a little key, a little tool to be able to use that to look at a lead sheet and be able to figure out how to make a major chord. The most common chord other than a major chord that you'll see is a minor chord, and that is indicated with a lowercase m after the letter of the note name. So for example, if you wanted to play the same root C, but you wanted it to be a minor chord, you would label it with a capital C and a lowercase m for C minor. So to make that chord, it's actually pretty simple. From our major chord, the middle note, which is our 3rd of the scale, is lowered by a half step. So sort of like you flat that 3rd. So if you were here and you had all white keys, that middle note is going to just go down by a half step, becoming, in this case, a black key. But that's not always the case. It would depend on where you start from your root. So 2 ways to create a minor chord. 1, you could use those same half step tools to create your major chord and then just move the middle down by a half step. Or you could reverse the half steps. So instead of going 4 and then 3, you would go 3 and then 4, and that would create your minor chord. So those are 2 different ways that you could do that. This works for any of the 12 notes. You can also use this from a black key. If someone wanted you to play an F sharp chord or a G flat chord, you would look for your F and sharp it, or you would look for your G and flat it. The black keys can serve double purpose as either a sharp or a flat, depending on what key you're in. And you'll see that indicated by those symbols that we talked about before. But you would start with a black key and you would just follow those same exact rules of 4 half steps and then 3 to create your chord. So with our worship teams, a lot of what we use is lead sheets or chord charts. We typically, in a lot of our modern worship contexts, don't use a lot of written sheet music with staff notations, treble clef, bass clef, all of that stuff. We would typically have a lyric sheet that has chords indicated within that sheet. So that's how we do it at Lifehouse, and that's how we figure out all of the chords for the songs that we do. But a lot of churches are moving to a number system, and we call it Roman numeral analysis. Some people call it the Nashville number system because it was heavily used in Nashville. And this is where you basically take the chords that we just talked about, and we take that scale, that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
That 7-note major scale, and we assign a number rather than a chord name like C or G flat or D. Instead of calling them by the letters, we would call them by the number of that key. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. You need to have at least an awareness of the numbers, the whole steps and half steps. You would have to be a little bit more familiar with how the scale actually works to be able to use this. But I'll give you a quick flyover of the number system so that you can understand a little bit more how it works. We're going to go back to our do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, our major scale. So if we start with C, once again, it's just an easy one to do because it consists of all white keys on the piano. We have our C, which is 1, D, which is 2, E, which is 3, F, which is 4, G, which is 5, A, which is 6, B, which is 7, and then when we come back to C, that's either 8, if you want to complete the scale, or in reality, it actually comes back to 1. Now, you may have noticed in music, we only use letters A through G, and they continue in that pattern all the way up through the keyboard. So once you reach G, the next note would be A. So that's why the letters are as they are indicated. Whenever we start with the C, it ends up going in that direction. So with that being said, we can know that in the key of C, 1 is a C chord every time. 5 is a G chord every time. F is a 4 chord every time. And so we can actually label the chords by the scale degrees of that key. The reason that this is helpful is because a lot of instruments like acoustic guitars, sometimes electric guitars, use capos where they actually transpose to make easier hand positions. But then if you are using a chord chart or if you have a confidence monitor that shows the chord patterns, they end up having to transpose in their heads. If we're in the key of G flat, they're not actually playing the G flat scale chords because they've used a capo to make it so that they can utilize their hand positions and their patterns in the easiest and most efficient ways possible. So they end up having to do an extra step in their head, or they have to end up memorizing all the chords and not utilizing the sheets. The number system eliminates that extra step for them, and it actually creates a really great system where everybody can know what key we're in, know what chords are being used in that key, and then we don't have to think about each instrument interpreting that in a different way. It's also really great for improvisation. So if you have a part in your service where it hasn't been planned but the band is playing together, you may have a band director, a music director, someone who's indicating where we should be going, and to use the numbers makes it really easy so everybody can sort of go with the flow all at the same time and know where to go. So the pattern for the number system is pretty easy. Basically, we typically will use the same chords throughout most of our songs. There are exceptions to this where something won't even fit within the patterns of the scale degrees, but for the most part, all of our songs fit pretty nicely into those patterns in music theory. So again, if we're talking about the C scale, with 1 being C, typically our major chords are going to be 1, 4, and 5. In this case, for the key of C, that's going to be a C chord, an F chord, and a G chord. So that would be a C chord, F chord, and G chord. And those are our major chords for that key that we'll typically use. The 2, 3, and 6 of the scale will usually be minor chords. So you would have a D minor chord, an E minor chord, and an A minor chord. So if you were using a number system and someone said, oh, we're going to go between the 1 chord and the 4 chord, and we're just going to go back and forth, you would know that that means the C chord and the F chord. Or if someone says, I want you to play a pedal point on your keyboard of the 1 and the 5 of the key, then you know that that 1 is C and the 5 is G. And they're asking you to just hold those down on your keyboard. There's a lot of different ways that the number system is helpful. The reason that they are major or minor chords is once again based on that series of whole steps and half steps. That whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern that we find in the major scale. That indicates whether you're going to be playing major or minor chords for each of those degrees. So I hope that that makes sense so far. Again, this is just a really basic flyover of those systems. So basically, for worship, these are the kinds of things that you could use as beginner musicians or beginner instrumentalists, or even if you've been playing an instrument for a really long time, but you've never really learned the theory behind it, or your church hasn't started the number system yet but would like to. These are easy shortcuts to help you. I like that word better than tricks, actually. Instead of saying tricks, I'm going to say shortcuts. These are shortcuts for you. You are giving a lot by serving, and we want to make things as easy as we can for our musicians so that you can have all the tools that you're going to need. And we want you to be able to have them in the quickest way possible. For me, I've been playing piano since I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I didn't really get a lot of the shortcuts. I had to learn through the whole system of sheet music and the staffs and all of that. This is a lot more efficient way, especially for worship teams that mostly utilize lead sheets and chord charts. So, one more piece of information about how to find a key or even how to transpose music into another key. If you are looking at a chord chart and you just see a bunch of major and minor chords on there, sometimes the chord charts will indicate what key you're in, but sometimes they won't. Or if you have to transpose to another key and you're just not sure what that key is, there is a little shortcut to be able to figure out what key you're actually in. So as I said before, in a major scale, mostly your major chords are going to be 1, 4, and 5. And these are also the most commonly used chords in any song. Some songs don't even have a minor chord in them, although when they do, the most common one is the 6. So typically, you'll see a lot of worship songs that'll have 1, 4, and 5, and possibly a minor 6. And then, of course, from there, if there are more chords, you can bet they're probably going to be the 2 and the 3 minor. So if you're looking at a chord chart, a really easy way to figure out what key you're in is to find 2 letters that are next to each other in the alphabet that are not minor. What you're looking for is your 4 and your 5. So once again, if I was in the key of C and I saw a lead sheet or a chord chart and it had a C chord, an F chord, a G chord, an A minor chord, I could look for the letter names that are close to each other on the alphabet. An F chord and a G chord are neighbors in the alphabet, but neither of them is indicated as minor. I can bet that's going to be my 4 and my 5. And knowing my letters and knowing my alphabet, I can then move backwards to know that if G is 5 and F is 4, that must mean that my 1 is C. And to check it, sometimes I also look at the minor chords to just be sure. But I found that to be a really easy shortcut to be able to figure out what key I'm in if I'm looking at a chord chart. I've also used that to figure out transpositions. If I find a recording on YouTube or if I find something online that's a different key than the one that I've been practicing in, I can look at what chords are being used and quickly figure out what key I'm actually in. So that's a basic flyover of the chords, the scale degrees, the letters, the half steps and whole steps that make up the structure of music theory. And next we'll be talking about rhythms, which is the other half and equally important piece of the puzzle of music theory.